Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar of today. Today's webinar is there for the Annex III organizations, and we'll be talking about the Annex Z as a key component of Harmonized Standards. My name is Elsa. I'm moderating the webinar in the background. You're all muted during the presentations, but there's a Q&A panel that you can use, and we would also like to invite you to raise your hand should you have a question. We're not that many to connect today, so if you raise your hand, we can unmute you so you can immediately ask your question. Should you be on one of our social media channels, feel free to talk about the topic, where you can use the hashtag training for standards to talk about this. The webinar has been recorded, so we'll also share with you the recording and the presentations later today. So then I think we can immediately dive into the presentations. I would like to give the floor to my colleague Frédéric. Thank you, Frédéric. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Els. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Frédéric Mlanao. I'm an account manager at CENELEC, and I'm the manager of the Harmonized Standard Compliance team, a team that is dedicated to support technical bodies in general in drafting harmonized standards. So the topic today is the Annex Z. And as you know, probably the Annex Z is really a key component of harmonized standards. So this is the agenda for this morning session. We will start by giving a definition of what is a harmonized standard. Then we will go through the different development processes for drafting a harmonized standard. And then we will dive into the core of the webinar on the Annex Z, what it is, what is an Annex Z, how to fill in an Annex Z, what are the different types of Annex Z, where to find it, and then some key drafting information related to the Annex Z and to the elements supporting the legislations. And then final elements dedicated to the HAS contractor. So who are the HAS consultants, what company manages them, and the different steps for the HAS assessment. But we will start with defining what is an Annex Z. What is a harmonized standard, sorry. And as you know, the standardization, the harmonized standard is a document that supports the legislation. So the standardization supports the legislation. The legislation defines the what needs to be addressed by a harmonized standard, and the harmonized standard is the how to support the legislation. And so the harmonized standard is drafted by a private independent organization. It is voluntary, and again, it explains how to reach the goal. And harmonized standards are state of the art. In this next slide, we will see the the complete path from the standardization request to the presumption of conformity. So the standardization request comes from the European Commission, the legislation, and they define what has to be addressed, what has to be in the legislation. Then the standardization request is made to CEN and CENELEC, or ETSI, to the European Standardization Organization. Once approved, the draft European standard is started to address this standardization request. And so the harmonized standard is drafted, and if compliant, at the end, is offered for citation to the European Commission. And once cited in the official journal, and only cited in the official journal, then it gives presumption of conformity. And the presumption of conformity, we will see it in the next slide. This is really key for the manufacturers, for the European industry, because this will allow the presumption of conformity, and this will give access more easily to the single market. Now, what are the essential requirements? Those are the requirements that are in the legislation. The definition is its fundamental criteria specified in the European legislation that products, services, or processes must meet to ensure safety, health, and environmental protection. For the legal framework, The essential requirements are outlined in various European directives and regulation, and they form the basis of the development of harmonized standards. And again, the compliance with essential requirements is mandatory for products to be legally placed on the European market. And you have examples here of safety requirements for electrical equipment, for example, for the LED, and so on. And then for the presumption of conformity, that is really key for harmonized standard. So the presumption of conformity is a legal concept within the European legal framework where product, services, or processes comply with harmonized standards and therefore are automatically presumed to meet the essential requirements of the relevant European legislation. And this will simplify the market access by reducing the need for further conformity assessment. So this is really key for harmonized standards, and that's why harmonized standards are really a useful tool for the industry, is thanks to the presumption of conformity that facilitate the access to the single market. So manufacturer may voluntarily comply with harmonized standard to demonstrate the conformity of product or services with the essential requirements. And this is where the Annex Z is really important, is that to be able to benefit from the presumption of conformity, standards need to have an Annex Z that makes the link between the clause of the standard and the essential requirements of the legislation. And this leads us to the next slide. And so the standardization request is a precondition for citation of a harmonized standard in the official journal. Once the harmonized standard is cited in the official journal, it gives the presumption of conformity. But the Annex Z is really key because the Annex Z is the document that makes the link between the essential requirements of the legislation and the clause of the harmonized standards that support the presumption of conformity. And for the harmonized standard to be assessed, to be cited in the official journal, it has to be assessed by a HAS consultant. We'll see the role of the HAS consultants later, but it has to be assessed by a HAS consultant, and the harmonized standard shall have the following elements. So the Annex Z, again, the document making the link between the standard, the clause of the standard, and the essential requirement of the legislation, and other European elements, for example, related to the normative references. If for example, if it's an ENIC standard, you have to have another annex that makes the link between the normative references used at international level and their corresponding European normative references. We'll see. It is explained in another presentation. But so what is key here is the Annex Z that makes the link between the clause of the standard and the essential requirements. And the Annex Z has to be prepared by the European Technical Committee. This is key for standards that are developed in parallel with ISO and IEC. The Annex ZZ for CENELEC or ZD for CEN has to be prepared by the European Technical Committee. I will talk about that in one of the next slides coming to the process. This is key to anticipate and to start working on the Annex Z as early as possible. Now we know what is a harmonized standard and more or less what is an Annex Z. We will go to the processes for drafting a harmonized standard. And so we'll start with the innovative process for homegrown harmonized standard. So you have here the timeline and the complete process. It starts with the CCMC quality check, where within CCMC we do a first check on the mature draft. That is a draft that is almost ready to be circulated for inquiry. And the goal of this first check is to check in the draft if there are elements that could potentially lead to a lack of compliant assessment. And to perform this check, we use the common checklist that is the same document used by the HAS consultant to perform their assessment. And as well, it's the same template used by the technical committees to perform their self-assessment. And performing the self-assessment is mandatory for projects developed at European level for homegrown projects. So quality check, first step. Once the quality check is finished, we deliver a report, the outcome of the quality check to the TC. And here they have 4 weeks to address the comments received during the quality check, to update their drafts before the draft is submitted for the first assessment, the major draft assessment. Following the major draft assessment, when the assessment report is received, then the TC have the possibility to contact the HAS consultant to discuss the comments received and to eventually update their draft before the inquiry assessment. The A2, the confirmatory inquiry assessment is optional. It's only if there's a lack of compliant assessment at major draft, but more than 90% of the cases, there's a lack of compliant assessment at major draft because it's the first time that the draft is exposed to the HAS consultant, and most of the time there's a lack of compliant assessment. And then during the formal vote part, there's another quality check on the pre-formal vote draft, same principle. We check the draft using the same template as the HAS consultant, and we identify elements in the draft that could potentially lead to a lack of compliance assessment. Then the TC has the opportunity to update the draft based on the comments received on during the quality check. And then there's the pre-formal vote assessment. And the last assessment possible is the last confirmatory assessment, but this one is optional, and we hope that it will become exceptional. And this is only when there's a lack of compliance at formal vote. And so in total, there's 4 HAS assessments possible for a work item. And it's not possible to request an assessment on the work item that has been made available already. The standard is published, made available, and offered for citation. And if everything is okay, it's cited in the official journal, and then it benefits from the presumption of conformity. Now, it's almost the same principle for standards developed in parallel, except that we focus on the CD stage for the quality check, because we don't want to interfere with the international development time frame, and to avoid interfering too much, we focus on the CD stage for the quality check. And if there's a CD assessment as well, there's the CD assessment. For the development at international level, in parallel at international level, this is happening obviously only if there's a CD. It happens that there's no CD circulated at international level, and the project goes directly to CDV. But if there's a CD, we perform a quality check if the CD is long enough, and or we directly request a CD assessment. So what is key for the standards developed in parallel, and I would say it's key as well for homegrown standard, is to start as early as possible and to anticipate. The goal of these new processes is to shift the focus and the efforts at the beginning of the development to avoid having the project blocked at the end because of issues with the assessment. For example, if the Annex Z is drafted relatively late in the development as CDV or sometimes at FDIS, and it's sent for assessment, you have high chances of having a lot of comments, and a lot of comments that are technical, meaning they will be very difficult to address before the end of the development. So the goal here is to start focusing on the harmonization as early as possible for the European TCs, sorry, when developing standards in parallel to liaise with the international TC so that the development of the CD draft is followed at European level and the Annex Z and all the European elements could be drafted at the same time and in parallel with the development of the CD draft so that when the CD is ready, we can, at European level, perform either the quality check or the CD assessment. And this is really key to have to give the maximum of chances for the work item to have a compliant assessment at the end. So what is really key here is to start early and to communicate with the international TC. The common checklist, it is mandatory for projects developed at European level, for homegrown projects, but it's still highly recommended for drafts developed in parallel with ISO and IC, because you will see on white criteria, your work item will be assessed by the HAS consultant, and therefore you will be able to perform a self-assessment on those same criteria that will help you identify potentially weakness in your draft, and this will help improve your draft so that hopefully at the end it receives a compliant assessment. This is for the development processes. Now I will go back to the Annex Z. So what is an Annex Z? So the Annex Z we call Annex Z, but it's the Annex Z for CEN and the Annex Z for CENELEC. This annex is informative, it's not normative. And again, the goal of this annex is to make the relationship between the requirement, the essential requirement of the regulation or the regulations and the clause of your standard. And if your standard covers several legislations, let's say LVD, EMCD, and RED, you have to have as many Annexes Z as your standard supports regulation. So in my example of your work item supporting LVD, EMCD, and RED, then you will need to have 3 different Annex ZZ, 1 per legislation. If you have 1 legislation, then you need only 1 Annex Z, but otherwise, if your standard covers 2 legislation, you will need to have 2 different Annex Z. In the templates for the Annex Z are a big difference between CEN and CENELEC. So for CEN is the Annex ZD, and it has a table ZD.1. And so if you have a CEN work item, and if your CEN work item covers 2 legislations, then you will need to have a table ZD.1.1 and another table ZD.1.2. And so you will need to have as many table ZD.1s as you support legislations. And for CENELEC, same ID, the Annex ZZ, that is standalone, but you will need to have as many Annex ZZ as you support legislations. The templates are available on the CEN and CENELEC website. You have the links here to the CEN boss and the CENELEC boss, where you will find the different templates. In the next slide, I have an example of a template for Annex Z and a few explanation on how to draft it. So again, the Annex Z shall indicate the relationship between the essential requirements and the specific clause of the standard. Harmonized standard that does not have to cover, all the relevant requirements of the legislation, but the Annex Z must be always consistent with the real coverage of the requirements. And as well, ideally, you should have a link. I mean, the title of your standard, the scope, and the Annex Z must be coherent, and the coverage of the essential requirements must be coherent. We have a dedicated training for that, talking about specifically about the Annex Z. And finally, it's really key that the Annex Z provides correct reference to a specific clause or subclause of your standard. And instead of, for example, giving one clause that contains several subclauses in the Annex Z, it's better to have what we call granularity, meaning to divide your standard in subclauses addressing specific essential requirements of the legislation so that your Annex Z can be very granular and cover very specific essential requirements. This to avoid giving the, what do we say, leaving room for interpretation. The more granular you are on the covering of the essential requirement, the better to avoid potential issues with misinterpretation or uncovered. Now, this is where you can find the Annex Z templates. This is for the sandbox. As you can see here, there are several Annex Z, and depending on the legislation you cover, the Annex Z could be a bit different. At the top, you see the generic template. This is the one that has to be used by default. But depending on the sector you are working on, for example, machinery, you can have a different template. And this is the same page for CEN, where you have the generic template at the top. And then at the bottom, below the generic template, you can have sector-specific templates. And this depends on the agreements between the European Commission and the unit in charge of that sector. And it can happen that depending on the sector, for example, construction, there you have specific requirements where you cannot use the generic template. But normally you try to use the generic template, but you have to adapt to your specific legislation. Now, some key drafting reminders that will hopefully avoid you having a lack of compliance assessment. Today, we analyze, when we receive an assessment report, we analyze the main reason for lack of compliance. And today, the main reason for lack of compliance are mostly due to the Annex Z in general. And in the past, we had as well a lot of issues with normative references, but it's less the case today. But key elements here, key recommendations when drafting standards is first, perform the self-assessment. As I was saying, this will help you identify the criteria against which your standard will be assessed. So this will help you check your document and see how eventually it will be assessed by the assessment. Further requirements for the clause supporting the essential requirements, meaning the clause that are listed in the Annex Z, it is very important that you draft clear and verifiable provisions. If your requirements are not clear, are vague, if they leave room for interpretation, and if they are not easily verifiable, you will have probably an issue and you will probably receive a lack of compliance assessment. So it's really key to draft clear and verifiable provisions. And by following the internal regulations part 3 about the drafting rules, if you apply the drafting rules listed in the internal regulations part 3, you will reduce the chances of having a lack of compliance assessment. About the normative references, so we have a bit less problems today with the normative references, but still it's important for you to remember that they shall be dated, active, and published when your draft is made available. While you are drafting your harmonized standard, you can use normative references that are at a draft stage under certain conditions. But when your draft is made available, and when it is made available, then we will offer it for citation. Then it's very important and it's mandatory actually for you to have your normative references dated, active, and published when we make your harmonized standard available. And as well, it's not mentioned here, but the normative references shall be EN-ISO, EN-IC, or EN standard. You cannot use, you can only use international standards as a normative references or European standard. If you need to use standards, for example, from IEEE or ANSI, you need to have an agreement, a specific agreement with the desk officer in charge of the legislation. Another important element, is we highly recommend you to refer to a specific clause within the normative reference. So instead of saying you use EN 12345 in your clause, try to say for the test method, use EN 12345 clause 7, for example. It's better to be specific on the normative reference because this will avoid potential issues with the chains of normative references. And finally, as an important recommendation, we recommend you to use the CCMC guidance documents. I have put a link here to the boss page. We have a lot of guidance documents, but this will really help you draft your standards, and potentially this will avoid you to fall in a trap, I would say, and avoid you having a lack of compliance. So voilà, this is the part for the key drafting reminders. Now, let's focus on the HAS contractor. The HAS contractor today is EY. It's Ernst & Young, and they are the one managing the pool of HAS consultants. So the HAS consultants, as we saw in the previous slide on the process for developing a standard in parallel, they work on behalf of the European Commission, but they are managed by EY. And so they make the link, EY makes the link between, and the HAS consultant between the European Commission and the ESOs, so CENELEC and ETSI. And the ESOs are the one making the link with the technical committees and the working groups drafting harmonized standards. And so the HAS consultants have several roles. And so I will not go through all the bullet points here, but their main task is to assess draft harmonized standard developed on the base of standardization requests from the European Commission. And the HAS consultant, their main task is to assess harmonized standard, but as well, they have to have time for meeting with technical committees. And the split is more or less 75%, 25%. So 75% of their time is dedicated to performing assessments, and 25% of their time is dedicated to having meeting with HAS consultant. And I come back to my recommendation of requesting meeting with HAS consultant. It's very, very important for you when you receive an assessment report, and if it's lack of compliance, please engage with the HAS consultants, request a meeting with the HAS consultant so that you can clarify the comments. And this will really help you understand what you need to do, and this will increase the chances of getting a compliant assessment at the end. Important element, the HAS consultant cannot co-draft the standard. So you can only have meetings with the HAS consultant after you receive an assessment report. But the HAS consultant does not participate to the consensus building during the draft. About the meeting request following an assessment report. So it's really, really important for you to engage with the HAS consultant. When you receive an assessment report, I think now EY has included a link in the assessment report so that you can connect to the page where you can request a meeting with the HAS consultant. So it's very important for you to engage with the HAS consultant. Ideally, 4 weeks before the meeting, at least, you should make the meeting request, and you should provide as well a full meeting agenda excuse me, a full meeting agenda for the meeting. And so here, important element as well, you can only request an assessment with a HAS consultant following an assessment report. At the bottom here, we see what the HAS consultant can do and what the HAS consultant cannot do. So in a nutshell, he can convey the European Commission position, participate to meeting to clarify the draft following an assessment report, but the HAS consultant cannot contribute to the development process and cannot contribute to the consensus building. And as well, the HAS consultant cannot participate in meetings normally without EY's approval. This is the last slide for today's presentation, and it's various links to some webinars and guidance documents that are key. So drafting rules, the first one, internal regulations, part 3, requirements and normative references. This is the same webinar, but the principles are the same for CENELEC. This is really a key webinar where the drafting rules are explained, the use of normative references, and this is really an important webinar to follow for drafting of harmonized standards. This is another one that is important for the standards offered for citation in the UGU. And voilà, all the others here are really key, but if you have to follow only one webinar for drafting, it would be the first one. That was my last slide. It was a lot of information in not a lot of time. Sorry. So thanks for your attention, and let's open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Frédéric. There are a few questions in the Q&A panel. I saw also Anda replying a question, so thank you very much for that.
So I will try to go one by one. So from Herbert, how is it possible, or what could be the reason that a mandated standard does not have an Annex Z? Plus, if a TS is delivered under a mandate, does it also have to have an Annex Z? That's a good question. So indeed, in some legislation, some mandated work, I would say mandated work, indeed, the Annex Z is not mandatory. It's not, I was about to say it's exceptional. It's not exceptional, but indeed some mandated work does not have an Annex Z. And so because they don't have an Annex Z, you don't have to draft an Annex Z. But so we have a short list of mandates that do not need an Annex Z. And for the TS, if it's delivered under a mandate, so the TS is a bit special because normally the TS cannot be a harmonized standard. The TS developed under a mandate is meant to be directly referenced in the legislation, and therefore you don't need to have an Annex Z for such a document. So again, a TS, you cannot have a TS listed in the official journal of the European Union, and so you don't have to have an Annex Z. But you can have TSs that are directly referenced in the legislation. I hope this answers your question. Otherwise, please add something in the chat or raise your hand and you can ask a question. Question from Fanny Rato. Good morning, Fanny. What is the expected timeline for the HAS consultant assessment on the CD? And do you recommend that the CD ballot wait for the consultant feedback and necessary follow-up meeting? So the CD timeline, so the CD at international level, I think it's minimum 8 weeks, but it can be 12 or 16 weeks. So if the CD is 8 weeks, we will not perform the quality check, but we will directly request the CD assessment. And normally the CD assessment, the report is delivered within 35 days. So if we request the CD assessment at the beginning of the CD circulation, you will receive the assessment report before the end of the CD ballot. And so you will be able, I mean, the TC will be able to address the comments of the CD ballot and the comments from the House consultant before the CDV. But so here, again, it's very important for the European TC to start drafting the Annex Z at as early as possible, so that when the CD ballot is circulated, is open, we have the Annex Z, and we can request the assessment at the same time. So that when the CD closes, the assessment report is there, and the TC can address the European element, address the comments from the House consultant. Question from Stéphane Noël. When will be the first webinar mentioned done? So if it was about the drafting rule, the webinar has been organized already. And if you, so the training, the slides will be circulated after the webinar. And if you click on the link, you will have access to the page and to the recording and to the training material of all the webinars we did already. Question from Michela. What are issues with the chain of normative references? It's a good question. So if you use a normative reference, if you say EN 1234, and in this normative reference, EN 1234, there's a clause that, for example, for a test method, that support your requirement. And in EN 1234, there could be another normative reference into EN 1234. Let's say EN 5678. Inside EN 5678, in the clause that support the requirement, there can be another normative reference used to support that clause, and so on and so on. And so if you refer only to the normative reference without specifying the clause, you can have quite a long chain of normative references. And normally the House consultant will check all the chain to check if the requirements does not contradict if there's not an issue with the legislation. And so to avoid having this chain, it is better to be specific on the use of the normative reference and to target a specific clause within the normative reference to avoid having the issues with the chains of normative references. Question from Mark Roll. When will the contract with EY expire? And when is the kickoff for the new contract? Very good question. So indeed, last time, so it was in 2023. So the previous House contract ended, and during a certain time, during, I think it was 6 months, there was a gap between the two contracts. And this generated a lot of issues because during the gap, it was not possible to request an assessment, and quite a significant backlog built up during that gap. And when the new contract started, it was in August 2023 or 4, I mean, almost 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago, 2023. When the new contract started, there was a significant backlog, and because of that, the assessment reports were delivered quite late because the House consultant had a lot of backlog to clean and to address. The actual contract will end next July, and we have already asked the European Commission to anticipate the end of the contract to avoid having the gap as we had almost 4 years ago. And so normally this year we will not have a gap, and we have already invited the European Commission to anticipate and to work on the next HAS contract so that we don't have a gap as we had 3 or 4 years ago. So, question from Catherine. In the machinery field, Annex Z needs to contain all essential requirements, even though they may not be relevant. In slide 13, it, however, said that this is not needed. Well, yes, it's a good question. So my presentation was focusing on general advice, but you can have sector-specific requirements on how you should fill your Annex Z template. Machinery is a good case. Machinery, indeed, the new Annex Z for machinery, all the essential requirements at least are listed, and there the TC has to mention if it is covered or not. But we will soon have a dedicated webinar for machinery because this one is not following the general principle for the Annex Z. And that's why I showed you that we have several Annex Z templates. We have the generic one, and then we have some sector-specific one. I talked about construction, but machinery is one of them. It's not following the general Annex Z template. And then the filling of the Annex Z for machinery is not following the general principles. But we will organize a webinar dedicated to that in the beginning of 2026 normally, but we will be informed when this new webinar is available. Question from Ludovic Lowers. Does the new EN drafting tools like OSD complete automatically the Annex Z? Good question, Ludovic. We are not yet there. So by default today, OSD are, Harmonized Standards are not drafted within OSD because OSD is still under drafting and we are still testing it. We have some test cases of Harmonized Standard within OSD, but no, OSD does not automatically fill in the Annex Z now. I don't know that it will not come at some point, but it will not come in the near future. For now, Annex Z is not automatically completed through OSD. Question from Gilles. In the area of cybersecurity, there has been a lot of discussions of external standards that committee members would like to reference. Each of these have to be asked for individually. Is there any advice on what information is required to enable an external standard to be referenced in a standard? Yeah, good question. And this actually has to be discussed with the European Commission. So it's not CENELEC that is imposing that harmonized standards have to be EN-ISO, EN-IC, or just EN. It's the European Commission. And so, yeah, today this is a case-by-case, it's discussed on a case-by-case basis, but this is to be discussed with the European Commission and with the desk officer in charge of the legislation for the best way forward. I have a follow-up question from Herbert. Is the list of legislation where harmonized standards do not meet an Annex Z publicly available? Herbert, I would invite you to contact your CCMC project manager. And if you don't have that, contact me by email. I don't know if we have such a list available, but we can find a way to provide you with a list. Thank you. Question from Amina. You mentioned that the lack of compliance mostly happens due to the Annex Z. Yeah, there's no question here. So if you have a question, Amina, please raise your hand or write it in the chat. Thank you. Question from Guido. Are EN-ISOs and EN-ICs now submitted again to the European Commission? So Guido, this is off topic. Yeah, ENICs, no, we don't offer them yet for citation. And we started reoffering some ENISO, but this is still under discussion, but I will not cover it here because it's off topics today, sorry, for today's webinar. Question from Tanya. You mentioned that the TC can be directly referenced in the legislation. How is it done in practice? Tanya, to be honest, I don't know because this is the European Commission that decides for a specific need to use a TS to support a requirement from the legislation. I don't know how it's done because it's a kind of a legal act, but I do know that if a standard is missing, the European Commission can use a TS and to list it directly in the legislation to support a specific need for the legislation. Question from Amina, trying to complement the previous question. To address citation issues about the Annex Z, some are proposing to only assess and cite Annex Z, but you mentioned that most of the lack of compliance comes from the Annex Z. Does this mean that we will not solve the citation issues? So, does this mean that we will not solve the citation issues if we decide to only cite the Annex Z? So, we cannot cite only the Annex Z because the Annex Z is part of the standard. The Annex Z is the document that makes the link between the clause of the standard and the essential requirement of the legislation. It's kind of, it's not, but it's kind of a mapping table between the what is defined, what needs to be in the standard, so the legislation, and how to address what is in the legislation. So I come back to one of the first slides I had, the pyramid, where the standards support the legislation. And so the Annex Z has to be in the harmonized standard. And I said, yes, today, the main issues are, I said, are in the Annex Z, but it's because the issues are in the clause listed in the Annex Z. And I was talking about some drafting recommendations. So if the clause in your standard that's supporting the presumption of conformity leaves room for interpretation, for example, gives the choice to the manufacturer, this is not accepted. For legal certainty, the clause of your standard must be clear and the requirement shall be verifiable. And if it's not the case, your standard will receive a lack of compliance assessment. And we will say that it's because of the Annex Z, but it's because actually the clause of your standard is not drafted in a correct way to support the legislation. So if you focus on drafting your requirements, if your clauses are clear and verifiable, and they are listed in the Annex Z, then you will not have an issue anymore. So it's a bit more complex than that. So indeed, it's the Annex Z, but it's because the standard itself, so the clause listed in the standard that are listed in the Annex Z to support the essential requirements, they have an issue. I hope you understand my explanation. Question from Brecht. As an expert, if I have, as an expert, have suggestion for the requirements to harmonize standard, is it allowed to share the suggestions? So to share your suggestions, Brecht, you have to be in a working group or to participate to the development of the standard. But try to to contact your CCM project manager to see how you could help drafting harmonized standard. Question from Isabelle. Do you know what is the reason behind many eco-design standards being developed but then ultimately not cited in the OJE? Isabelle, I do not know the specific reason. For that, I would invite you to contact. There's Benjamin, it's our colleague at ECMC who is in charge of eco-design. But because this is a specific question for eco-design, Isabelle, I would invite you to contact us and we could analyze specifically for eco-design what are the reasons for non-citation. So there's a follow-up question from Isabelle related to it. Could you tell us about the specificities of eco-design and Annex Z? So it's the same principle actually for eco-design and Annex Z. Standards for eco-design have an Annex Z, and depending on the specific part of eco-design that you're targeting, you may have a different Annex Z template, but the generic principle stays the same. The standard, the way you draft the standard, and the clause of the standard supporting the essential requirements, they are the clause supporting the essential requirements are listed in the Annex Z. That is making the link between the essential requirement of the legislation and the clause of your standard. And for eco-design, you might have a different template. You have a different template. You are not using the generic template, and you can find all the templates on the CEN and or CENELEC boss. But the general idea is the same. The clause of your standard supporting the essential health and safety requirements of the eco-design legislation are listed in the Annex Z. And then your draft is assessed. In this case, it's not assessed by a HAS consultant that is managed by EY, but it's assessed by VHK consultants. So it's another pool of consultants, but it's exactly the same principle. An assessment and assessment report delivered, and then you address the comments from the HAS consultants. So the general principle stays the same. Question from Maturama. Is there a way to be directly notified when a standard is published in the official journal? I don't think today there's a direct notification. So today, when a standard is listed in the official journal, the European Commission sends a message to CEN and CENELEC. We encode this information in our database. So for those who have access to projects online, for example, you can see the information there. And then we, CEN and CENELEC, inform the permanent delegates and all the national standardization bodies that a new standard has been listed in the official journal. And then you can have this information through the national standardization bodies. And if you're not in the mailing list informing about that, you should contact your NSB to get the information. But we are working on having APIs to have a direct exchange of information between the European Commission and CEN and CENELEC for now. So in the future, it's not yet the case, but in the future, when a standard is listed in the official journal, we will receive a notification through an API informing us about that. And our database will be updated live. And in the future, I guess we will be able to share this information to the public, but we are not yet there. Yeah, there's still a question from Guido about the offering of ENISO and ENIC. So please, Guido, come to me. I will address your question. So yeah, we have resumed the offering of ENISO, but for ENIC, because of I will not enter into the details, but because of the ECJ ruling about the access to documents, we cannot offer yet ENIC documents because we are entering into a legal fight for copyright and voilà. So we cannot yet offer ENIC documents, and we are actively working with ISO, IC, and the European Commission to address the issue, and we hope that we will be able to start offering ENIC documents as well soon. Voilà, I think I went through all the questions here. If you have any question, please let me know. If you don't, please contact us. If you have a follow-up question, don't hesitate to come to us, to contact us, either me directly or your CENELEC contact. It can be the sectorial project manager or anyone else. And we will be very happy to address your question and to support you.
Thank you, Frédéric. I just launched the feedback poll. If people would, I would like to ask them, the attendees, to submit their replies to the feedback poll. It's only 3 short questions, so that would help us to improve our webinars in the future. I see that someone else is asking if the presentation will be made available. The answer is yes. I will share the presentation and the recording later today with all the attendees.